My golden child adopted brother stole my grandpa's heirloom World War II medals that were supposed to be mine and refused to give it back after our grandpa passed. So my grandpa left me something even better. I was my parents' first child, but due to the traumatic nature of my birth my mother was never able to give birth again, and so 7 years later they adopted my younger brother Kyle, whom they would go on to treat as the golden child from that very day. The day before adopting him, I was told I needed to be extra kind to Kyle because his parents died when he was young, and because we wanted to make him feel welcomed. The thing is, I've never really gotten along with Kyle despite all my attempts to be kind to him. During the first few months of his stay, he realized that my parents were being extra comforting towards him and he decided to ask for the brand new Lego Star Wars set that I had wanted. My parents refused to buy me it but didn't give a second thought to getting it for Kyle. Luckily at that time though I was at least able to play with him on his Lego set. However, as time went on he seemed to get more greedy and more spoiled. He would frequently get more presents than me and he got accustomed to getting this type of treatment. For example, when I was turning 14, all I wanted for my birthday was the new iPhone. My parents definitely had enough money for it, but for my birthday I just got some nice t-shirts. On the other hand, a month later my brother got a new iPhone and he certainly made sure to flaunt it in my face. Another thing was that he didn't have a curfew whereas I had to be home by 9 p.m. sharp. The reasoning for this was that he was a bigger boy. I routinely complained about that logic, but my parents shut me down with the same argument about how I was much more privileged in many other ways. Now although my brother is a really big guy that was on the football team, as well as very popular in our school. He was a huge World War II geek. And during the holidays we would always go spend a week at our grandparents' place. For context, our grandpa was a World War II veteran and had many awesome items from his time serving. He seemed to be in good health, but last year he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and simultaneously my brother started putting a lot more emphasis on the way he talked about my grandpa's medals. He had mentioned them a few times beforehand, but now he stated he couldn't wait to get his hands on them. He talked about how he was sure they were going to him despite knowing my grandpa had hinted at them being given to me. So I think it was a surprise to him when my grandpa during our stay during the holidays decided to pass down the medals as a family heirloom to me. This is when the big conflict started. At first he asked if he could borrow them just to take a look, and so I gave them to him. A couple hours passed and he still didn't return them so I asked for them, to which he replied that he just wanted to examine them for a bit longer because he was doing research. Finally the next day on the car ride home from our grandparents I demanded to have them back, and he said that he deserved them because he actually cared about them, and that he was keeping them. I yelled at him and told him that they were mine but he refused to give them back so I finally complained to our parents and they just made the worst excuse for him and told me that it really shouldn't matter considering I wasn't even as interested as he was about the topic. I told them that he couldn't just take whatever he wanted from me, but they still just told me to take the moral high road. One day I stole them back and it became a whole argument about who owned them, and of course, my parents took his side and grounded me for a whole week. I was really annoyed with my family so I asked if I could go stay over at my grandparents' house for a day or two and luckily they agreed. When I was over at my grandpa's house, I could tell that he wasn't in the best health, but he was still making it through day by day. During dinner time, I told my grandpa and grandma about how Kyle stole the medals that he gave me and that I really felt treated unfairly by my mother and father. My grandpa after hearing that told me not to worry about the medals, because if I really wanted souvenirs he would give me something worth much more than just the medals. This piqued my interest, and he said that he would make sure to put everything in his will so that even after he was gone, it was clear that I would be the owner of those items. I was really curious now to know what items I would be receiving and could just picture my brother's face when he found this out. A couple of months after that my grandpa passed away and I was extremely sad for a long time. At his funeral I cried more than I had ever before in my life. Eventually, the will came around and a lawyer talked about the financial details with me first and then moved on to the items. Apparently, I would be the recipient of my grandpa's war uniform, all of his photo albums, the letters that he received and sent out his war firearm, and his honorary sword. The lawyer instructed that I would have full possession of these items and they would be legally under my name once I turned 18. He also said that a lawyer would have to confirm every single year that I was in possession of these heirlooms and that if I weren't my parents would lose out on a lot of the benefits in the will. My parents obviously understood that if my brother tried to take anything from me, the repercussions would be huge. My brother got extremely jealous and did try to take my stuff, but for the first time in his life, my parents strictly reprimanded him. My golden child adopted brother stole my grandpa's heirloom World War II medals that were supposed to be mine and refused to give it back after our grandpa passed. So my grandpa left me something even better. Part 2. After being reprimanded for the first time for his entitled actions by my parents, my adopted brother began scheming on a way he could take the thing off of me. At first, he tried using his popularity at school to bully and make fun of me. He would constantly tease me for being such a history nerd, and would constantly turn people against me at school. But I didn't care and certainly wasn't going to give in to his semantics. I think after a while he realized that what he was doing by bullying me had no effect on me and decided to try to change his game plan. He then began to try to bribe me. He said he would get me anything I wanted from mom and dad, and even offered his new phone, considering I had a crappy iPhone 6. I still told him that grandpa's possessions were priceless and that I wouldn't want to trade them for anything. He still continued to try and bribe me but after I rejected him enough times he seemed to have gotten really desperate. One day Kyle went home early from school and skipped football practice. I decided to also go home to see what he was going to do. When I got home I crept in through the back door and had my phone recording. When I walked into my room I saw Kyle with a lighter, setting fire to all of my heirlooms which he had packed in a big metal box that he found in our shed. I got him on footage and tried to jump in to stop, but by the time I did that, some things were burned such as all the letters and uniform. I started screaming at him and I even severely wounded my arm in trying to put out the fire. Kyle seemed kind of shocked at first, and when he saw that I was injured he knew he effed up and immediately started apologizing. He told me he would do anything as long as I didn't tell mom and dad. I temporarily agreed with him, but as soon as both of my parents were home I completely snitched and told them everything that happened and showed them my wound as well as the recording I had on my phone. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents go into absolute rage. They were screaming for what felt like at least an hour at Kyle and even threatened to disown him. They told him there would be severe consequences. That all happened last night and I'm still devastated that my grandpa's heirlooms got damaged. I don't know what to do. My trans sister-in-law called me transphobic for saying female trans athletes shouldn't compete in women's sports. So I exposed her to her MMA club. My sister-in-law came out as transgender 2 years ago and my wife and I had absolutely no problem accepting her sister. However, she does tend to make it her whole personality, which can get irritating at times. Whenever family events come around and there is someone new at the function, she makes sure to let them know that she's trans immediately. She also makes it a priority to send articles in the family group chat about transphobia in the world, and how we are not doing enough to stop transphobia in our communities. She also tests us in person on whether we have read her articles and done a full in-depth analysis of them to make sure we are seeing them. One time I messed up a statistic and said 20% of trans people face transphobia in their communities, and the actual number was 32%. For the next month I didn't hear the end about how I didn't care about the trans people that were suffering, and how I was transphobic. For context, my sister-in-law was always very passionate as a young kid about martial arts, so 6 months after her transition, she decided to join an MMA club. From what I know she hasn't informed them about the fact that she is a trans female, and no one in the family has ever told the club, as it was an amateur fighting club, and we all supported her healthy outlet. One time though, she decided to sign up for a friendly tournament, and we all decided to go support her. In her first and second fights, she absolutely viciously destroyed the opponents with first-round knockouts. After everyone congratulated her on her win, I pulled her aside from the family and told her that what she did was unfair, and that it was against the rules to not inform them about her medical condition. She started calling me transphobic. She said that I was just diminishing her accomplishments and that she won fair and square because she was a woman just like them. She started acting really cold to me over the next couple of weeks. After that day she started sending trans athletes accomplishments in the group chat, but I wasn't going to back down. I told her and everyone else that I thought it was unfair how those athletes had biochemical advantages in the sport, and that even though most sports are anti-doping, the trans athletes were all on some form of steroids. This my wife and I to have slight disagreements because she had asked me to be more sensitive around her sister. The holidays were coming, so we decided to host Christmas and New Year. This is when the incident happened. At the start of the function my sister-in-law was doing the usual and talking to people about the articles that she had sent to everyone, and things up until then were very chill, but then when we were all at the dinner table she brought up the topic of Leah Thomas. She said that she was a revolutionary, but I quickly countered with the fact that he was just lazy and a cheater. He wasn't good enough to become a top-level pro swimmer in the men's competitive division, so he just turned into a woman and became the best in the world. I told her that if that wasn't cheating or unfair, then I don't know what is. She started to make a huge scene at the table and it started with her yelling and cursing me, and then she got mad at everyone else for not defending trans rights, and then it escalated to her throwing food and silverware everywhere. That's when I told her to leave the family function or else I would be calling the cops. After some more cursing, she left. Our family is somewhat split on the situation. My wife and a couple of other people are saying that what I did was wrong and that even though I knew what was going to happen, I did it anyway. I countered by saying that I wasn't going to give up my morals and values just to comfort her, and it was unfair for her to force us to comply with her ideology without any fightback. My sister-in-law wrote a long message in the group chat about how bad of a person I was and said that she was going to no contact with me. She also said that if my wife doesn't divorce me then she will go no contact with her, and this has been incredibly tough for my wife because of course she is going to stand behind me. However, she also loves her sister. So what I did next definitely surprised her. I decided based on our earlier conversation about her tournaments, that the only real way to get revenge on her for her actions was to simply tell the truth. 2 weeks after the holidays her gym reopened. I could tell by her face she was surprised to see me, and even more surprised when I showed full proof and identification that she was a biological male who was competing in the women's division. She started crying and screaming at me, but in the end, it was useless. Her trainer had told her that he was going to personally make her banned from all tournaments in the state and that she should never come back to this gym again. A lot of her peers gave her a really ugly look as well, and she just left the place crying. I apologized to the person who ran the gym for the inconvenience and left the place. I knew that she was going to be mad, but my phone had literally turned into a vibrator. I was getting tagged in all sorts of social media posts and getting messages in the group chat. I wasn't surprised that my sister-in-law had completely lied about the situation to everyone, including my wife. So when I got home it took a lot of explaining to my wife and I had to reach out to a lot of people individually to explain what happened. I know my sister-in-law wasn't expecting what was to come for her next. My trans sister-in-law called me transphobic for saying female trans athletes shouldn't compete in women's sports. So I exposed her to her MMA club. Part 2. After my sister-in-law and I got into an argument over whether trans male-turned-females should be able to compete in women's sports, she made a big scene at Christmas dinner about it, so I exposed her to her MMA club and got her kicked out. She tried to blast me on social media and messaged everyone in our family the false version of the story, including my wife. So when I got home I explained the full truth to my wife and other people in the family. To my surprise a lot of the family was in support of what I did, and they just didn't want to be the ones to offend my sister-in-law, and so because of that as a family, we decided to kick her out of the family group chat and everyone besides us was going low contact. However, I was going no contact and my wife said that she still loves her sister no matter what and will not limit contact with her. She said she would speak to her as much as her sister wished to speak to her. I fully support my wife, and even though I don't see eye to eye with her sister, I completely understand the importance of family. Update: my sister-in-law has decided to move to another state because she despises us and can't stand our transphobia, so I won't